Good evening all, and welcome. Is it possible for an object to be cursed? Or perhaps the soul of someone departed to stick around and reside in an object? I suppose it's time to find out. I hope you're ready, because it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. About 10 years ago or so, my family and I brought back these small vases who we were told were 400 years old from Machu Picchu. The vases were made from mud and had a face carved on them. We were given them by a family friend who said he wanted to give us something special for visiting Peru. He claims he brought them from a local in the Pisco region of Peru where Machu Picchu is. We brought it back home to Canada, and pretty much from week one, a horrible streak of bad luck and accidents began to happen to our family. My mum came down with cataract at a very young age. My father lost both his jobs. My brother and I were both constantly sick, and my little sister would start screaming randomly. Pretty much on the verge of being homeless, we were looking for things to sell and came across these things. We didn't know if we could even sell them, and for how much. To get an idea of the value, we called one of my dad's friends in Peru who had worked in a museum. After a bit of back and forth, he told my dad that these types of items are not meant to leave its home soil and are not worth more than a few bucks. He said that these items are probably cursed. He said to lift the curse, we prick our fingers and smear a little bit of blood on each one and send them back. Now, of course, we were very skeptical and thought they were probably worth something. We assumed the guy wanted them so that he could sell them. I mean, a blood sacrifice? That's ridiculous. Fast forward 2 days, my mother and father get into a pretty nasty car accident. We were okay, but they both needed to be off work for a few weeks. After that, they both decided that maybe we should send them back and do the blood thing. We sent them back, and the next week after that things got noticeably better. My father found a very good job, as did my mum. We found a really good place to live with a very low rent and overall better health. What do you guys think? Coincidence or cursed pots? When my sister was quite young, our grandmother bought her a porcelain doll. The doll wasn't anything special. It wasn't an antique or anything like that. It was just one that you would buy at a novelty shop. It was on a stand and couldn't be moved without possibly breaking it. She had this doll for a few years before my parents divorced. After the divorce, we moved in with our mother in a poor neighborhood in Alton, Illinois. The house felt strange. It also had a strange smell. My sister put the doll in one of the built-in cabinets in the wall, and that's where she stayed for the first few days. At first, we started to notice small changes about where she was or how she was positioned differently than she was before. She would be on the shelf facing the living room most of the time, and when you left the room and came back, she would be rotated a different way. Okay, we thought. Mum's probably messing with us. We largely ignored it, but it kept happening. After a few more months, the doll started ending up in different places in the house. She would be on the cabinet, and when you came back from another room, she would be on the dining room table, or she would be on one side of the table in the living room by the couch, or on the floor facing the television. We had made a lot of new friends in the neighborhood, and when they came over, I would show them what the doll would do, and without a hitch, I would put her somewhere, and we would leave the room for a few minutes and return, and she would now be in a different spot. Now, I'll go back to saying that we thought my mum was messing with us at first, but mum was at work a lot of those days, and we skipped school plenty of times to stay home, so it wasn't mum doing this. One day, we decided to mess with the Ouija board I had in my closet. I don't remember if we bought it or it was just there. The messages coming back from the questions we asked identified a spirit called Candy Zimmerman. She didn't say much, but I also being able to connect with her myself by the board. She said she had a crush on me. One day I skipped school again, but my sister went, and I always walked with my buddy down to the bus stop and hung out with him before heading back home, and I watched my sister get on the bus. My mum worked early, so she wasn't there that day. Then I went back to the house and locked up, and since I was still tired, I opted to go back to bed. The next thing that happened, I will never forget. I heard a knock at my bedroom door. It startled me awake, but I ignored it and laid my head back down. After a few minutes, there was another knock, this one much louder and in a rhythm. I still also remember to this day. Think shave and haircut rhythm, but different. This time I was freaked out and laid there with my eyes open for I don't know how long. The door to my bedroom was heavy, and it always stuck in warmer weather, which it was. The next thing that happened was the door popped open just enough for me to see out into the hallway, but not enough for me to see over the edge of my bed. I sat up in bed and looked down on the floor, and there standing at the entrance to my room was that doll on its stand, looking at me. Before the fear set in, I was actually pissed off. Did my sister come back? Was she messing with me? I got up, took the doll by the hair, and carried her out into the living room. No one was there. I checked the front door and it was locked. I barged to my sister's room and no one was there. I barged into my mum's room. No one was home. At this point I was freaking out. I took the doll to my sister's room and threw her in the closet. I buried her in a stack of bags full of old clothes and boxes of junk and shut the door. I spent the rest of the day sitting on the front porch, waiting for Mum to come home. It never happened again, and I made sure to have a friend or local Wiccan bind the Ouija board which she kept. We moved out of the house a year later, and after a few more paranormal incidences. As for the doll, after we moved back in with my father, she was in my bedroom closet for about 5 years. One day we cleaned it out and threw her away. Was the doll haunted? I don't know. It could have just been that house, and whatever it was, moving things around. My very young daughter started telling us that she would see a lady in our house 6 months ago, about the time she started to be able to communicate well. She said there was an older lady who she described as always wearing brown. We call her the lady. I showed my daughter pictures of her great-grandparents on both sides, thinking it was just a deceased family member, but she never recognized anyone. We started noticing sounds, like doors creaking, rustling sounds and things dropping, cabinet doors creaking. But everything we heard we thought could be potentially explainable. We started hearing things more frequently about 5 weeks ago. I saw a cabinet door in our bathroom swing open while I was brushing my teeth in the reflection of the mirror behind me. Again, super strange, but perhaps somehow potentially explainable. 2 days later, we had a massive water leak behind that same mirror. Due to the water leak, all of our belongings had to have been moved out of our house for the contractors to repair the damage. I've been cleaning and boxing stuff up, and I was boxing up one item in our room when I found 2 old photographs around the 1880s. As soon as I pulled them out, my daughter said, "That's the lady." I asked her which, and she pointed to the younger of the 2 women. We asked her 3 times throughout the day about the photographs, and each time she picked out the same lady. We also noticed the lady in the photo appeared to be wearing brown because of the type of photography. so we took the photographs out and moved them to my new art studio, which is on our property and still in progress. Since removing the old photographs, we have not heard one strange noise in our house. My oldest daughter never makes it through the night in her bed. She has complained since she was a little girl of moving shadows in her room at night. She has since slept every night in her room, all night, since the photographs have been removed. The daughter who sees the lady usually sees her once every week to 2 weeks, so we can't comment about that. Completely surprised by the drastic change in our house, I decided to use a dream/sleep recording app that only records when it hears sounds to see if I could catch something near the photographs in the studio. I mainly want to prove or disprove it to myself. I recorded Thursday afternoon for 3 hours and had 7 audio clips of birds and planes. I tried again Thursday night from 12 to 8 a.m. and this time I had 67 clips. Most of the clips were this weird reverb/electrical feedback that started at after midnight and went on and off for hours. I also heard what sounded like 2 separate single knocks or objects dropping. There was nothing electrical in the studio except the phone itself, as power has not been running in the building yet. There isn't even a breaker box. There's a power pole outside the building about 20 feet away from the front, and last night we left the recorder on from 11:30 to 7 a.m. Not one weird electrical sound all night. We literally caught crickets and 1 clip with 2 small bumps or knocks followed by rustling. We also caught a strange sound at the end of some clip. We don't remember how we came into possession of the photographs. They are not of our family. We confirmed this with our parents. My husband thinks he remembers that one of my customers gave them to me a few years ago. My boyfriend's grandfather is an antique collector, and one of his interests are dolls, porcelain to be exact. They picked this up, and the previous owners said to be very careful with it because it was special. Completely unfazed by this statement, he didn't ask any further questions. He brought it home with him about 2 weeks ago. The first 3 days were fine, and it stayed in the kitchen. The following day, my boyfriend and I were laying in our room down the hall talking. It was around midnight when suddenly 3 light knocks were heard through the door. We look at each other, and from the other side I hear his grandfather say his name. I get up and open the door while he was getting ready for whatever task his grandfather had in store for him. Upon opening the door, I expected to be brought face to face with him, but no one was there. I closed the door and shrugged it off, but after I closed the door, I could hear footsteps from down the hall, so I go out to investigate. But in the distance, I can hear both the grandparents snoring. The following day, around the same time, all power to the house was lost and didn't return till 5 or 6 a.m. Thankfully, throughout that night, 1 lamp was on. I don't know how, but occasionally it went out. But for the most part, somehow, it was still being powered. A few more nights go by without anything happening, until just a few nights ago. All through the night there were screams, not in the house but right outside. Last night, at around 2 to 3 a.m., I was laying down watching videos when my boyfriend sat straight up, rambled gibberish mixed with numbers. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he was okay, looked me dead in the eyes, screamed and threw himself back and continued snoring. I asked him about it earlier today, and he has no memory of it. His grandfather is taking the doll to his shop tomorrow, and hopefully, things will go back to normal. After he took it out the house and put it in his antique shop, the air seemed heavy and everyone is easily irritated. Usually the family is upbeat, kind of an I can conquer anything kind of attitude. I've also had a few hyper-realistic dreams. One where I was drowning, another where I was burned alive, and another where I was pulled apart, and another one where I was captured and shown my new face as I didn't have one. There was a tall man there that said, "Look at the beauty I have created." Unnerving to say the least. My grandmother on my mother's side was always considered to be our family's crazy one. Long before I was born, the marriage to my mother's father had failed because my grandmother was far too interested in witchcraft. My grandmother really liked astrology. This was considered witchcraft to my grandfather's very Catholic family. Growing up, she used to tell me stories about the fairies that lived in her garden and how I should never leave my shoes outside at night, for the gnomes may steal them. As any child of the 90s, I was in love with Disney. So all of Grandma's stories seemed to be just that, stories. There were always rules to being at Grandma's house. Most certainly not your typical ones. Things like leave the windows open at night so the frogs can come in, and be sure not to step on any of the frogs. If you bake something, you must leave a small piece for the fairies, or things will start to go missing. Odd rules, but as a kid it was fun. Now my grandmother was a hoarder for my entire life. The type who has a trail from one end of the house to the other. Everything else was stacked floor to ceiling. She never hoarded trash. It was always useful things, just things she was probably never going to use herself, but needed to have just in case. And food. Oh Lord, did that woman hoard food. My grandmother grew up during the Great Depression, constantly having to move around and leave everything she owned behind each time. Once she grew up and was able to create her own stability, she started hoarding. My mother says my grandmother started hoarding when my mother was a teen and never stopped. Most of the things she would collect came from Goodwills, flea markets, garage sales, and pretty much unwanted second-hand crap. Something else I feel as though I should mention. I am the youngest child of 3. My 2 older siblings are my half-siblings. My sister and I share the same father, and brother and I share the same mother. My brother was around 4 or 5 when my parents met, meaning I wasn't the first grandchild my grandma had, but I was the only one she seemed to like. My siblings were never invited to her house, or really welcome to be there at all. My grandmother treated my siblings as though they didn't exist. Me, on the other hand, she would call my parents constantly to ask when we were going to be in the valley next, and if they would like to bring me to her house to spend the weekend. Neither of my other siblings ever stayed the night at Grandma's house. I feel as though the above information is important as to why I'm making this post. I was 13 at the time I brought him home. I had spent a weekend with that grandmother while my parents were staying at another relative's house not far from there. This was pretty normal, as stated before. I seemed to be the only family member she liked. Well, that weekend my grandmother gave me a music box / porcelain doll. I collected porcelain dolls, so I didn't think anything of it, the fact that she was giving me a new one. She told me to take care of him, that he's very special, and I needed to be sure to give him the love and attention he deserves. I was instructed to wind and play him at least once a month. Okay, whatever you say, Grandma. My mother and her ended up having a falling out, and I was told that if I wanted to see her or speak to her, I would have to find my own way of doing so. But as far as my mother was concerned, she was dead to our family. Still to this day I have no idea what their falling out was over. Now there's a whole lot to be covered between the time period of 13 to 18. The strangest of them all was at 15 I had to have an emergency neck surgery. A mass had appeared and started cutting off blood flow to my brain. If I hadn't have gone to the hospital for my neck being sore, I could certainly have died. Fast forward to Mother's Day 2011. I'm 18 at the time. Every 4 years or so, my grandmother's birthday would fall on Mother's Day, and did so on that day. I hadn't talked to her for a few years at that point, since I wasn't allowed to use the house phone to contact her, and for the longest time no one would give me her phone number. So I got her number and called her, and the conversation went like this. "Hey Grandma, it's me. I just wanted to call you to wish you a happy birthday and Mother's Day. Do you have anything special going on?" "Oh goodness, I thought I'd never get to speak to you again. I'm surprised that bitch mother of yours let you call me." "Yeah, I'm sorry I haven't called sooner, but I've really missed you, Grandma. How would you feel about me making a trip up there to see you soon?" "Oh, that would be wonderful. We can finally talk about all the things your mother has been hiding from you. She's been lying to you your whole life about who you really are. Don't deny it. Embrace it. You need to confront your mother and demand she tell you what she's been keeping from you." "Oh, okay, Gran. So what do you think of me coming to see you soon? I'd really like to catch up with you. I've missed you so much. Do you think you'd come to my high school graduation next month?" "Yes, you should definitely come see me. Can you come this next weekend?" "No, I don't think I can, but I'll try." After a very long silence, "Do you still have him?" "Who?" "The jester?" Yeah, I do. Why?" "Bring him with you." "Oh, alright, Grandma. Well, I'll have to go soon because I'm making dinner tonight. But I love you, and I'll call you again soon." I attempted to call her again a few weeks later to see if she could attend my graduation. She didn't answer. My other phone calls over the next few months were unanswered as well. She died that December. Which brings me to my whole point of this post. The doll she gave me I've had for 10 years now. I've had a lot of unexplainable experiences I'd prefer to keep private, but I'd be willing to share those more on a one-to-one basis if they could possibly help. But as far as the noticeable activity that I and my partner witnessed are as follows. Night terrors start. If it's not in our bedroom or sleeping space, like the absolute worst I've ever had. Things go missing and turn up in places they should not have been in. It will go through months of sitting alone on a shelf, not being wound or played, but will constantly play single notes or small parts of the song. And then there's our new dog. He can't stand it. He will wake up from a dead sleep and start blinking and growling like crazy at it. I have a video of him doing so. I have depression and think back to when I first started to feel the way I do. It was around the time the doll came into my life. I guess what I'm getting at is I need help, figuring out if there really is something going on or if I'm just crazy. Help to bring him and myself to peace again. There's a whole lot that I wanted to say but haven't been able to, and would be more than willing to talk to someone if they think they can help. And please, don't recommend Sage. You don't think I've tried that? I am currently on vacation in Mexico. I have family here, my grandparents, 4 uncles and their family, and my family all live on the same street. We live on a ranch and the nearest airport is a 4-hour drive. When we arrive here, Uncle D picks us up, and on our way to our ranch, him and my dad were catching up. My uncle proceeds to tell him that currently they have been having some weird experiences with a doll, that the doll was haunting him and his family for a while. This included keeping them up all night by knocking on their windows and stuff. He also said that it was attacking people who were walking down the street late at night, and that a guy even tried to shoot it. Everyone was fed up about it and tried to set up a group to attack it. I was creeped out, but thought that maybe he was lying or joking around. We arrived, and for the first 2 days we slept at my aunt's house. This is because our house had recently been renovated. Those 2 nights, I wasn't able to sleep, and every time I closed my eyes, I had a dream that I was being assaulted. I told my dad, and he decided that we should try and sleep in our own house. On our 3rd night there, we were walking down the street late at night to visit my grandparents, and my Uncle Jay was there. He was drinking and said that the doll was going to get us if we kept walking at night. He was drunk, so I dismissed the comment. Later that night, we came home and tried to sleep for the first time. I'm not gonna lie, the house feels really creepy at night. I can't walk down a long hallway that goes to an empty room because I feel some bad energy there. My room faces the big glass sliding door we have to the backyard. I always felt like someone was watching me there. We've been here for 3 weeks already, and yesterday my little cousin Jack was outside with us in the backyard. We were burning trash and he mentioned that the doll lived in the big tree in our backyard. He lives right next to us, and we don't have a gate separating our property from his. He says he can hear it cry at night, and one time he saw it when he was going to the restroom, as their restroom is located outside their house towards the backyard. I didn't believe him, but got spooked out, and that same night, Uncle D's son was playing Xbox with us. Cousin Jack was with us too, and my brother brought up that doll and said that Cousin Jack was lying to us. As soon as we mentioned it, Uncle D's son went pale and said he didn't want to talk about it. That spooked me out, because Uncle D said that the doll was haunting them. So, if it was true, his son had to know something about it. It scared him so much, and that's when I believed it. He got me thinking, and that's probably why at night I felt like something watches me. My room faces the glass door, and the tree is right in front of it. So, after a few days, we noticed our sink was smelling. Now, we were on vacation, so we weren't cooking, and everything in the sink was mainly cups or bowls of cereal. We went on a 3-day trip to Guatemala, as we were staying in Chiapas, so the dishes from that morning were left uncleaned for 3 days. When we came back, there was a rank smell coming from the sink. It smelled like rotten flesh and we didn't know where it was coming from. I then cleaned the dishes and hundreds of larvae started to crawl out the sink. Some people might think that it was us being dirty, but we never found what caused that reek. I didn't find any rotten meat or anything that the larvae were eating. Some people said it must have been the pipes or something in the walls, but the house is brand new and the walls are made of brick and cement. As soon as the larvae came out, the smell went away. It was like a scene from a horror movie. We all left when we heard my cousin describing the muñeca differently. Someone said it was a mono or a monkey, so we concluded that it could have been a shapeshifter. I luckily never ran into it, but there have always been stories going around of unexplained things happening there. People say that they could have been made up stories because people are bored, whereas others say it's the truth. I've had my own experiences in there before. I've heard something with dark, heavy voice speaking to me in English when no one there speaks it. I've had dolls that I brought from the United States start moving when I leave them in that house. My brother claimed that he heard La Llorona before when he was coming home late. It could just be our imagination, but stuff does happen in Mexico. When I was a kid visiting New Orleans, my family went to a voodoo shop. I wish I could remember the name, but it wasn't one of the tourist attraction ones. It was hard to find and not like all the others. Anyway, I thought it'd be cool to buy this little black doll made from cloth that had no face or features, just black cloth in human shape, stuffed and sewn together. It was sold as a voodoo doll of death, and thinking back on it, I feel pretty dumb taking something like that home with me. Once back, many weird things started happening to my whole family, until we eventually moved because of it. Hearing whispering in my room late at night in an unintelligible language was common. I also heard an angry man say my name behind my ear as I was turning on the living room TV. I literally felt his breath. None of this my family believed when I would tell them. I was under 12, so it's understandable. What changed this and made us move the next day is this. My mum saw an orb come up to her face when she was almost sleeping, and she said she couldn't breathe for almost a minute while it was in her face. Then it flew into the corner of the room and disappeared. When we moved close by, and the new people in the house we made friends with started saying that their kids were hearing whispers at night, we never told them about this before when they mentioned it, which is the crazy part. I'm not certain if this is all tied to the doll or not, but other stories I've heard have made me think it might be. I work for a non-profit that helps mentally and physically disabled people live fulfilling lives. John and Chris are brothers. I work for the same company as Chris, but at a different house. There are several houses around the city and bordering area. He works at one that houses children. Only children. 4 of them, I believe. His story begins on a graveyard shift, which he was working with one co-worker, a middle-aged woman. The house has alarms on the doors and windows, which are alarmed during the night to let them know if any kids are trying to leave when they shouldn't be. Chris was downstairs in the office. His co-worker was upstairs cleaning. Suddenly, all the alarms in the house went off, every door and window. He sprang up, assuming the clients were planning a mass breakout, as he would later refer to it. He yelled to his co-worker to head out one door, and he went out the other frantically looking for whoever was outside. He saw one client standing beneath a tree but not apparently in a hurry. He thought he recognized the client to be someone called Barry. "Barry, head back inside," he said, or something to that effect. He continued searching for the other clients, but after running around in a panic, found no one. He gave up and headed inside to reconvene with his co-worker. He said he found Barry but no one else. She stunned him when she revealed that everyone was inside, having never left, including Barry. He said she must be mistaken. He was outside a big tree in the backyard. She wore her fear on her face when he insisted this. She explained how what he saw was in fact what staff of the house refer to as white dress, a ghostly woman wearing all white that seems to reside on the property and is often seen under that tree. Needless to say, he was surprised and confused and definitely creeped out. But the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, a client from another home, whom Chris was very close to, sadly died. He was sick for a while, and Chris was present for his final breaths in the hospital. He was wheelchair bound when he was alive, and later a client at the white dress home needed a wheelchair, temporarily while recovering from a slip and fall accident. They brought the wheelchair that used to belong to Kieran, and right away Barry began fixating on it. When it was no longer in use, Barry would take it for his own enjoyment. Staff took note of this and couldn't explain why he loved it so much. He would take it outside to a small hill, push it down the hill empty, and then return it to the top and do it over and over again. Barry is nonverbal, in that he can't speak with spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates using gestures. One useful gesture has him select staff's left or right hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, he could hold out my hand and say, "Barry, do you want tacos for dinner tonight?" and identify it as left hand option. Or do you want burgers for dinner tonight? Right hand. And then he would choose. He also had a tick where he would hold his palm up to his face very close and sort of mumble into it. This is actually what Chris thought he saw when white dress was under the tree. He thought Barry was there doing that. This is important because Barry would often do this gesture when he played with the wheelchair. Staff got curious and thought they might be able to determine who Barry was speaking to when playing within the wheelchair. They posed a sequence of this and that questions with fake names. Barry, who's in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily? No response. Is it James or Samuel? No response. Is it Stephanie or Teresa? No response. They did this a few times before dropping in the real name casually. Is it Kieran or Jen? Right away he selected the correct hand. Everyone present was shocked. According to Chris, he was the only real link between Kieran and this house. Barry and Kieran didn't know each other, and he didn't believe anyone talked of the previous owner of the wheelchair, and he can't explain how Barry knew his name. This story doesn't end there, however. For reasons unknown to me, Chris took this wheelchair home for a while. Maybe it was a keepsake. He took it home with him, and weird things began happening around his house. Chris and John, like I said, are brothers. They live in a big house and rent it out with their girlfriends, as well as 2 others. One day, everyone was out, except for John and Chris's girlfriend. Both of them claimed the door to Chris's bedroom slammed much too loudly and hard to be explained by wind, especially since no windows in his bedroom were open. This happened a few times while the wheelchair was there, which is more interesting when you know that Kieran would often get Chris's attention by slamming doors. John said other strange things had happened once the wheelchair arrived too, but I'm a bit confounded on details. I do know he claimed to have once heard someone calling his name, but no one was home but him. As I said, both Chris and John remain skeptics. They agree these events are all strange, but ultimately are not convinced. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would love for any of the paranormal subjects in the world to be verified, but I guess I need to see it myself to believe it. John summarized his feelings well by saying, "I'm not saying it was a ghost. I'm just saying weird things would happen while we had the wheelchair here, and they stopped when the wheelchair left." I asked about the current whereabouts of this wheelchair, but I forget what they said. Either they don't know, or it's somewhere else in the company, where Chris no longer visits. If I can get hold of it, I'd love to ask for more details. I'd like to know what you guys think about these stories. Specifically, I'm curious to know more about what John said are referred to as anchor points. The wheelchair was present when Kieran died. Apparently some believe that souls, which I do not believe in, can attach themselves to physical objects of importance from a person's life. This logic doesn't make sense to me. Even if I suspend my disbelief and believe in ghosts, what makes me believe these ghosts can attach themselves to objects? Is it the same logic that ghosts haunt certain areas, homes, vehicles, or rooms? I'm just dying to be convinced. And I always love hearing more stories and reading theories and learning about this topic. Finally, I'd like to mention that I spoke to John. He also has videos of the chair moving by itself on flat ground. It was deleted on his phone, but he hopes a co-worker still has it. He also clarified that he never really attributed these events to the chair until later when he heard staff speculate there was a cursed object, and he put it all together. Lastly, he added that another boy at the house was able to describe white dress, and he often played with the wheelchair too. The details get kind of confusing because the white dress stories and the wheelchair stories are separate, but he said it was all amplified once the chair arrived at the house. Finally, he told me of an incident where the wheelchair was rolling down hills and slamming the doors, and it was strange to him, because those were the things that Kieran loved to do the most while he was alive. When I was 16, I found a yellow sheer fabric, I think it was tapestry, with outline of white fishes on it in my parents' attic. It was summer. My room tends to get hot, so I ended up using it as a blanket of sorts. My parents have no recollection of it or why it was in our home. I remember one night as I was trying to look for it, and it seemed like it had vanished. I didn't really think much of it. I thought maybe my mum misplaced it when she washed it. I guess a few months passed and I remembered and wondered what had happened to it. My dad, turns out, burnt it. He said that one night he went to check on me and my sister as we shared a room and slept in separate twin beds. He told me that when he looked at my bed, it seemed like no one was sleeping there. He got closer as he was worried, and I was there. He said the more he got closer, he noticed it looked like I was wrapped with pitch black darkness, which really freaked him out, because my bed was against two big windows and I purposely had really sheer curtains so that the moonlight and sun would brighten my room. But somehow, with the moonlight shining, I remained to look like darkness. My dad removed the blanket off me to make sure I wasn't passed out under it. He said he later looked at the blanket to see why the hell a sheer yellow blanket would do that. He said the white fishes didn't look like fishes at all. He described it as looking like the skeleton of fishes with something inside the bellies trying to get out. That's when he decided to burn it. Honestly, I don't know what to think to this day. I never felt anything wrong with the blanket itself. I really think my dad was just being dad, as he's a man of faith, and around that time he was listening to a sermon of objects being able to retain spirits. Matthew 8:24-34 is what I remember him bringing up. I'm just wondering if anyone might have experienced anything like this. I'm not sure if the blanket was cursed, but whatever my dad thought, it was enough to burn the damn thing. Then again, my dad can be very extreme when it comes to things. I'd just like to know someone else's thoughts. I was going to my sister's graduation in Binghamton University, and my family rented out a well-priced Airbnb for 2 nights. The only one that had 5 bedrooms because extended Chinese family. It was a Victorian-era house, completely decked out with Victorian American aesthetics, trinkets, paintings of serious children, photos of even more serious children, ornate floral wallpaper and dolls. Many dolls. We were picking up bedrooms, and no one in my family wanted the room with the creepy dolls. I'm not superstitious, and I didn't see the room, and I didn't understand the gravity of the situation. So I was like, sure, I'll take the room with the dolls. You see where this is going. As midnight approached, I got tired, even after being energized by a tiny bite of baklava and an espresso. So I was the first to go to bed. I went into the room and saw the dolls. They were locked inside a glass case, all facing the bed. Don't be silly, I thought. You're a brave trans girl, and they're probably more afraid of you than you are of them, because you're something they've likely never encountered before. Silly thoughts. I decided to take out my black ebony-handled Opinel pocket knife and slept with it at the nightstand, so I would have some protection. I watched YouTube for a while, turned off the lamp, and went under the covers. I felt the doll staring, but my rational side told me it was all in my head. By 3 a.m., I was half-conscious, slipping in and out of pure unconsciousness. While I was in a dreamlike state, I was aware of everything going on around me. The dolls staring. Were they next to me? I was afraid to open my eyes. I blinked. And I thought, it's okay, I have protection. I didn't dare look at the ebony-handled knife on the nightstand. I was afraid I'd see a doll next to me. Then I remembered statistically armed victims of assault tend to have their weapons taken away and used against them. And I thought, my gosh, I'm gonna get stabbed. Then I heard vividly a playful, childlike voice. It would be my heart's desire. I immediately became alert, like R2-D2 rebooting after being in low power mode. Adrenaline rushed through me. I heard a ringing in my ear as my awareness went from 0 to 60 in a split second. I stayed like that until the sun started to rise at around 5 a.m. That was when I fell asleep. When I woke up, I dreaded having to sleep there again for yet another night. The next night I thought, you know what? Violence begets violence. So I slept with my pocket knife in my bag instead, and I fell asleep and slept through the night. I used to own many dolls and stuffed animals, as most 7-year-olds would. I believed in magic and had a huge fantasy. I even believed my dolls could move and do stuff when I wasn't watching, like in Toy Story. I always wanted to see my dolls move, but unfortunately never saw it. One day, my mother gave me a bowl of mashed potatoes and a glass of water. I went upstairs to my room and decided to have a nice meal with my dolls. I got some plastic bowls and spoons and put mashed potatoes in their bowls. I was hoping they would actually eat it. I had this one old-fashioned doll my grandma gave me, called Mary. I put the spoonful of mashed potatoes in her mouth and waited for her to eat it. Of course, nothing happened. After a few minutes, I wanted to go to the toilet, and before I left, I looked at my dolls and said, "When I get back, I want all the bowls to be empty," in a strict tone. So I did my thing, went back upstairs since we only had one toilet, which was downstairs, and when I got back to the seat, the bowls were unfortunately still full, which meant the dolls hadn't eaten a thing. But when I looked at Mary's bowl, it was empty. I was kind of shocked. I looked at Mary and her mouth was dirty, as if she had been eating it in a messy way. I rushed downstairs to my sister and mother and asked them if they had fed the doll, because the bowl was empty. They both said no and swore on their lives. "Maybe your mashed potatoes fed it to the doll," one of them said. But since I believed in magic, I was just happy about it. This wasn't the last time I saw Mary acting unusual. One time I put her on my bed before I went on vacation to Morocco, and after 6 weeks, when I arrived back to the Netherlands, I saw that Mary wasn't sitting on my bed anymore. Instead, she was sitting on my trash can and her body faced the wall, but her head was turned 90 degrees so that her head was facing me. My mother said, "You must have put her there before we left and you just forgot." That was weird. It wasn't the last time she did anything unusual. In 6th grade, I went camping with my class and took Mary with me. We made a huge fire while we were eating marshmallows. I took my doll out the bag and threw her in the fire. Everyone was confused, so I explained the paranormal experiences I had with Mary. And even though people didn't believe me and thought I was crazy, I was glad to be rid of her, and I'm glad I haven't seen her since that day. About 6 years ago, I lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone. My grandmother lived a few miles away from us in the middle of the woods. I used to love her house, but looking back, that house was pure horror. They had 100 acres of woods and not a house in sight. There was an old abandoned barn they used for storage for tools, but the rest of the property was unused. I was a kid, 1st to 2nd grade, and every time I visited I would sleep in a spare bedroom, aka the kids' room. The kids' room had a glass case mounted on the wall with at least 50 dolls all aligned looking straight forward. My great-grandmother collected vintage dolls from every state, and I was always petrified of that room, but didn't have much of a choice. One night, me and my sister are sleeping in the room, sharing the same bed when I wake up. The room is completely black, except for the dim hallway light. I remember seeing one of the doors of the case open, and one of the dolls started moving. Another time I was in the kids' room alone. I couldn't sleep because of what I saw last time, and that's when I noticed one of the dolls was out of place. Its head was facing the door, and this was odd because they were all mounted to the case and couldn't move. The doll's head began to slowly turn and look at me. I was off center to the left, so there's no way it wasn't paranormal. I sat there sweating bullets under my blanket, too afraid to yell for my grandma, and I eventually passed out. And when I woke up, the dolls were facing forward again. They have moved out the house since, and I think the dolls are in storage, but they still own part of their land and use it for camping. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stories. I do enjoy cursed and haunted object stories. These are pretty freaky. I wonder if an object really can be cursed. I've read a handful of stories similar to these ones, and they certainly make me wonder. In any case, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to do the normal stuff, the liking, the subbing, press the bell icon and all of that. A huge thank you as always to my wonderful patrons for helping with regular donations to help keep the channel afloat. If you're interested in having your name listed on screen and chipping in as little as $1 every month, then feel free to check out Patreon. It's an awesome place where you get some exclusive perks for signing up. So think about it. Link in the description. But for now, guys, it's time for me to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.